She's done work both nationally and internationally, and we're so appreciative to have her with us today. May I introduce, please, Osprey Orielle Lake. Thank you so much. Welcome.
Well, thank you all for coming out today on Earth Day. It's such a gorgeous day, and it's really an honor to be with all of you celebrating Mother Earth and showing your care for the Earth in future generations. As I said, I'm with the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, and we're based here in California, but we work nationally and internationally on climate issues. And we're very focused on bringing together women because we found that one of the most powerful untapped constituencies that could work on climate change is women. And I want to share with you a little bit about why that is so. About 60 to 80% of all food production in developing countries is done by women. So when we're looking at food security and food sovereignty, which is really important to how we're going to go forward, we're really talking about women. When we look at United Nations studies and see all across the world where there's extreme droughts going on, especially when we look again at developing countries, when you bring women into these action plans about what to do, they're very successful. When women are not engaged in these water programs, guess what? They don't work. So it's really important to understand how key women are to climate change solutions. They're the most negatively impacted around the world by environmental degradation, but they're also really central stakeholders when we're talking about what we actually need to do. We also know that when we need to look at the foundation of sustainability, as an example, stabilizing our population, it's really important to understand that the quickest way to educate people around population stabilization is through women. When we're talking about the health of our communities or local economies being successful, we're talking again about women being central to those solutions. It's something that we really want to bring forward to everyone is how important it is to lift up women's voices and women's leadership. We also know in the global north here in North America, 80% of all consumer purchases are decided by women. So when we look at campaigns around shifting to a clean energy economy and what we're going to do to get off of fossil fuels and demand from our governments that we want to have clean energy, women are the strongest constituency because think of it, 80% of what we consume is decided by women. So I wanted to bring that forward so you understand really why we decided to work with women, not just in our own country, but around the world. Before I go forward, it's really important for, I think, all of us, and I wanted to bring that to our attention today, to always remember also where we stand. Certainly with our mothers and Mother Earth, but also with the original people of the land here. So I wanted to take a minute to also acknowledge the Ohlone people who have walked here for many, many, many generations before us, and also to remember how they had good relationship with the earth, how they had good relationship with the land and the forests and the waterways and the mountains here. So I want to acknowledge the ancestors here and the Ohlone people who are still now here, and how it's been an incredible time of revitalization of Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous values, and how important that is to all of us. The other thing I wanted to bring attention to today, and this really is a way to also to segue from the talk we heard earlier from Layla from Amazon Watch, to understand also our privilege here in the United States. I find it amazing the opportunities that we have, which also means it's very important to us to actually do more than our share. As some of you probably know, here in the United States, we're about 4% of the world's population, but we're polluting about 25% of all carbon emissions in the atmosphere. At the same time, we have the privilege to be able to share our voices in a way that many people around the world do not. And I wanted to today, because this report just came out earlier this week, speak about an article that came out from the Associated Press, and it's really concerning the fact that around the entire world, the killing of environmental activists is rising globally quite exponentially, and I find this very startling and something that I know our organization is going to be looking into more deeply. And again, to really recognize the privilege that we have in the United States to voice our opinions and to get out on the streets and act. And I'm not saying it isn't done with great concern for our jobs or our well-being, but it's not the same as in many countries. Organizations are being shut down by governments and people's lives are under threat. And in this article from the Associated Press that was put out on April 14th, it says many of those facing threats are ordinary people opposing land grabs, mining operations, and the industrial timber trade, often forced from their homes and severely threatened by environmental devastation. Others have been killed over hydroelectric dams, pollution, and wildlife conservation. The rising deaths, along with non-lethal violence, are attributed to intensifying competition for shrinking resources in a global economy and abetted by authorities and security forces in some countries connected to powerful individuals, companies, and others behind the killings. And I just want to read one last section. It says, "We believe this is the most comprehensive global database on killings of environment and land defenders in existence," said Oliver Courtney, who's a senior campaigner at the Global Witness. "It paints a deeply alarming picture, but it's very likely this is just the tip of the iceberg because information is very hard to find and verify. Far too little attention is being paid to this problem at the global level." So I think it's important to understand again the level of importance it is for those of us in the United States to really speak out, because defenders of the land all over the world are being threatened. And this is becoming a very urgent matter because, as we know, as an example, the IPCC reports have been coming out, the different working groups have been putting out the reports, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is indicating, obviously, that we're already in a deep crisis with the environment, but in many other, what the climate crisis looks on the ground in terms of food and water and energy. And as we increase our population and as we look at our diminishing resources, we're going to see more and more of these threats. And I think it's important for all of us to understand where we can get engaged, and whether that's with our organization, or Amazon Watch, or 350, or Global Water. I mean, there's so many organizations and there's so many booths here. I think it's a time none of us can afford to sit on the sidelines, and that's the message I really want to say, is that things are intensified. There's a quickening going on right now. And in our organization, what we're working with is really a rights-based approach to this work. And the 4 rights that we're focused on are rights of women, for the reasons I stated earlier, because we really think women's voices are key at this time. Rights of indigenous peoples. About 85% of all the biodiversity left on the earth right now is in the hands of indigenous peoples. So it's very interesting that indigenous peoples who have been very connected to their relationship to the land and living a good way with the earth is also the place where the biodiversity is. I think there's no mistake there. So we are focusing on indigenous peoples' rights. The 3rd right that we're focusing on is rights of nature, and I'm going to go on the main stage in a little bit and talk in more detail about rights of nature, but it's a way of viewing a very different paradigm around our environmental laws to understand that we really need to stop seeing nature as property and a commodity and begin to look at the fact that we need to see nature as a rights-bearing entity. Our rivers, our waters, our mountain, our climate has rights of its own. And then the last right we're looking at is the rights of future generations, and how in many indigenous peoples' worldview all over the earth, this idea that we need to look out at the 7th generation, make decisions based upon what will care for our future generations. So we're focusing on the rights of women, the rights of indigenous peoples, the rights of nature, and the rights of future generations. And we think we need to have this big systemic analysis to really get us to where we need to go. The other thing I wanted to bring forward today is a few areas of action, because the organizers of today really stressed, which I agree, we've had a lot of talk and it's really good to be in a place of action. And I wanted to cite some of the things that we're working on that we think are really important. Obviously, I mentioned rights of nature. We're deeply engaged with the rights of nature movement internationally. We were in Ecuador earlier this year with the Global Alliance for Rights of Nature. working on a long-term strategy for that, and we're going to be doing a lot of actions in October and also at the next climate negotiations in Lima, Peru. We very much support the divestment investment campaign. I think it's absolutely crucial to make sure that we address bringing down these fossil fuel companies right where it hurts, which is in the pocketbook. I think it's also important to realize here in the United States, one of the most powerful campaigns we can get behind is putting a price on carbon. And Citizens Climate Lobby is a really good organization who's mobilizing around that work. And right, what that means is basically being able to have the polluters pay for polluting and putting carbon into the atmosphere. And what I really like about a lot of the different campaigns concerning putting a price on carbon are those that then give the money back to citizens, and also once we begin to put a price on carbon, it starts encouraging more solar and wind and geothermal technologies, because if it costs too much, the market will change, and we need the market to move in our direction. And lastly, I want to mention, of course, our organization, the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, WECAN International. And last year in September, we held a summit in New York. We had over 100 women from around the world gathering in New York right before the United Nations General Assembly. We had Dr. Jane Goodall, Dr. Vandana Shiva, Dr. Sylvia Earle. We had the head of the UN climate negotiations, Cristiana Figueres. We had Mary Robinson, the former president of Ireland, and then a host of women equally important from indigenous communities of Brazil, from Peru, Ecuador, from Africa, from India, grassroots women doing phenomenal work. And we met together. And two of the most important documents coming out of that event, one is called the WECAN Climate Declaration, which is online in different languages. We encourage you to go to our website, WECAN International, and sign that declaration. It's been going around the world. We presented it at the last UN climate negotiations in Warsaw and held a protest there and read that climate declaration. It's a very progressive agenda about how do we really stay below 2 degrees rise in global temperatures from a climate justice perspective. So I encourage you to look at that and sign that. And then right now the group is working on a very detailed analysis called the Women's Climate Action Agenda, which is a holistic view, everything from how do we put a price on carbon to how do we stop these extractive industries in different countries, how do we have forest protection, to how do we actually change our cultural narrative to be one of nurturance and care for the earth, and how do we bring a feminine perspective to our approach, to our worldviews. So it's a comprehensive report, and we're planning to launch that later this year, right before the UN Climate Summit. There's a special climate summit that's been called forward by the Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, that will be held in New York in September. We'll be releasing the report then, and we'll of course have that online. And we're using that as an organizing tool. There's many men working with us in our organization, I want to say. The organization's comprised of men and women. But we really believe that it's important to lift up the voice of women, indigenous people, nature, and future generations as a comprehensive way of finding a path forward. So we encourage you to share with us in the work that we're doing. And again, I just want to thank everyone for coming out today. And let's have it be that today is just one day this year that we mobilize, that we really make the commitment, because it is a time of the quickening of how much time we have left to make the changes that we need given global warming, that at this time we understand we have to mobilize today and next month and throughout the year. So I hope you'll keep coming out to different events and doing your own work in a good way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Osprey Orielle with WECAN International and the Women's Earth and Climate Caucus.